work on our 9-patch quilt squares. In this video, we will put the front, this 9-patch square together, and it will end up to be the front of a hot pad for us. So I have 3-inch squares cut out already. First thing you're gonna wanna do is lay out, find your plan. What's your plan for how you're going to sew these together? What order do you want these to be in? So I think that looks nice, and that's the order that I'm going to sew mine in. Of course, you can do whatever. You can do all squares different, you can do all squares the same, you can alternate them like this. There are so many different ways you can put these together. So be creative and do it the way you like it. And then what kind of foot should we use on this project? We have our regular wide zigzag foot. We have a 1/4-inch foot here. And we have another 1/4-inch foot here. It has kind of a guide for the fabric along the side. And we also have our walking foot. We are going to sew these squares together with a 1/4-inch seam. So if you do have a 1/4-inch foot, that will help you get the seam allowance consistent and nice. So I will use probably this one first, but really you can use any of them you want, as long as you get a 1/4-inch seam allowance and it's consistent and the same throughout the project. So first I'm going to sew this row together, then I'll sew this row together, then I'll sew this row together, and then I'm going to put those two together, put the whole row together like that, okay? So first I'm going to flip these over, right sides together, take it over to my sewing machine. So here I am at my sewing machine. When you get started, it's good to put your threads through your sewing machine like that, through the center hole and to the back. And then this foot is a 1/4-inch wide right across there, so I'm going to line up the side of my fabric with the side of that foot right there. Just like that. And to get started, I'm going to hold on to my threads in the back, and that will help make sure the fabric feeds through nicely, that the thread and fabric doesn't get drowned down into the bottom of the hole under the needle. I just give a little tug on this thread to get it started, get it moving in the right direction. And then when I end, I want my thread uptake lever to be at the top. So I turn my hand wheel at the end until this is up at the top, and then my stitch cycle has ended, and it's easy to pull the threads out. Alright, now I'm going to iron my strip. I have a little strip now. First I'm going to iron press the seam that I sewed flat. I'll do it on both of them. Just press it flat. That kind of seals in your stitches for you. And then I'm going to press the seam allowances both in the same direction, like that. There we go. You can also press from the right side to make sure it's nice and flat. And let's do it again 2 more times. Alright, my 3 strips are sewn together. So now I just have to sew these 2 together and then these 2 together. And we'll look at the seam allowances in the back. Alright, so I pressed all my seam allowances that way, all the way down. And when I put these 2 together, if I sew them together like this, then I'm going to be sewing through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers right here. That is going to be tough for my sewing machine. It's going to be very bulky. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this one around like that. Then we line them up. Now, what we've done is we have nested our seam allowances. The seam line, the stitch line, is matched up, and one seam allowance goes one way, the other seam allowance goes the other way. We'll put those together, and that's how we're going to sew it to minimize bulk at those corners. You're still going to need to be careful when you sew over them. Go a little slow. See how your machine handles it. The machine might get caught up on it a little bit, but it'll be better. So I'm going to pin each place before I sew it. Alright, so I have my raw edges even. I have my seam allowances nested. So I'm going to pin this into place. When you pin, you want to go down and then up. And when you sew, you are going to pull out the pin before you sew over it. Do not sew over a pin. The needle will hit the pin, and the pin will bend or break, and your needle will bend or break, and it won't be good. So as you sew along, you're going to pull out your needle. So I like to pin at an angle. Some people like to go perpendicular. Some people like to pin that way along the stitch line. But my preference is at an angle, and that way as it goes through the sewing machine, it's easy for me to pull it out. Alright, pinned, ready to sew. So I am almost to my pin. I pulled it out just in time. Remember, as you go along, you're keeping that raw edge even with the edge of the foot. Now my machine is a little bit stuck, it doesn't want to move, so I'm going to grab it in the back and just give a little pull to help it get over that hump. Now we'll do the other strip. Now, if I put these together, uh-oh, my seam allowances are going the same way. Let's turn it around. Good, let's nest our seam allowances. Down, up for pinning. See here, my seam allowance is flipping up over my foot. I don't want to keep sewing straight or my seam allowance is going to get bent back and it's going to be crooked. So I'm going to leave my needle down. That will hold the fabric in place so it won't shift around. I'm going to pick up my foot, straighten up that seam allowance. Sew my 3 strips together. Let's press them. First, we're going to press seam allowance flat. Do that to both sides. And if you really get into quilting, you're going to learn that different people like to press their seam allowances different ways. So that we can experience something different, we're going to press our seam allowances open this time. Some quilters love to press their seams to the side. Some love to press them to the, press them open like this. They have strong opinions about how they feel about it. But you can just learn all the different ways and find what you like the best. And then we'll press from the front side as well.
I want the phone. I want the phone.
Okay, we have a 9-patch square with nice seam allowances nested, pressed to the side, and pressed open.